And we must make sure that the tax is pointed towards growth. So yes, we can sit in a room and have 10 different ways of doing it, but as long as we have the objective firmly in mind, we can get there.
You know, let's say in the last 10 statements you've made, yes, you've ended with, we must keep government lean, we'll run a lean government.
Yes.
How do you intend to do that? Are you going to pick up the recommendations that Chamberlain talked about earlier on? Or are you thinking of a new system altogether that will ensure the government is lean? Even with the basic things like how many cars is the president going to be going around with?
Yes.
How's that going to work?
That's very important to me. I think that President Muhammad Buhari, when he came in, had a wonderful opportunity because of his ascetic nature, the simple man, to simplify very many things. If he had started going around with 5 cars in his convoy, he would have forced every other government official to have less than 5 cars. He could have done that. But he didn't. So, yes, there are very many things, symbolic and material, that can be done to make government leaner. And again, you have to look at what government does. I'll give you a great example. Somebody should explain to me why we in Nigeria, the only country in the world, have made financial crimes so important, more important than homicide, more important than kidnapping, more important than armed robberies. We trust those to the police. But financial crimes has to have a separate infrastructure, a separate thing for it. Nowhere in the world is financial crimes considered more important than murder. So if we can trust the police with murder, we can trust them with armed robberies, we can trust them with kidnapping, we should be able to trust them with financial crimes. We don't need a whole new bureaucracy to pursue financial crimes, only in Nigeria. So there are many things you can streamline and make government smaller, leaner, and more efficient.
Let me bring in Ajiri. He's got some questions as well. Ajiri, go ahead.
Make Nigeria work again document. When you refer to the various sectors, one of the kind of consistent themes is, of course, the privatization of assets and the concession of other assets. I've been able to go through the document quite thoroughly. In the power sector, your policy document is saying that the TCN, the Transmission Company of Nigeria, must be privatized. You're saying that in the rail sector, that the rail lines of the country, once they're developed, should be privatized. So that means that wherever they intersect, you would have to create new bureaucracy to essentially engage the various access points between companies. Same thing in roads. I mean, same thing across the board. Of course, NNPC is the one that's been getting all the news lately. Why is it that according to the policy document, this is kind of the fundamental undergirding strategy of funding infrastructural development, of funding some of the other initiatives that your policy document is founded upon?
Okay, let me say that the most important thing we can do in funding, not just infrastructure, but social programs like security, education, and health, is the fact that in Nigeria today, the amount of guarantees, federal government guarantees to GDP, is some of the lowest in the world. The federal government guarantees in the US to GDP is about 64%. In Nigeria, it's under 10%. If we can raise our federal government guarantees, in other words, give guarantees to the private sector to create all these infrastructures under a government guarantee, we can raise 30 trillion naira in the next 4 years to fund infrastructure. So the biggest way we're going to raise funds for everything we want to do is by creating a guarantee scheme that allows us to use the federal government balance sheet to give money to private sector under a guarantee to fund infrastructure. So that's the number one. But going to your specific question of privatization, government doesn't do things very well. We have seen this over the years. We are not saying we're going to rush tomorrow and sell everything off. We're going to have a process, but the idea is that we don't want government involved in business. We want government collecting taxes from businesses. We want government enabling businesses. We want government providing security for businesses. We want foreign investors coming to Nigeria to do businesses, but we don't want government in business as much as possible. So the general theme of privatization is consistent with.
Let me come in here. Because you had a tremendous opportunity, and you have a unique insight as the founding managing director of the assets managing Assets Management Corporation of Nigeria, AMCON, from 2010 to 2015. And you and I both know that the AMCON was inaugurated in 2010 as a result of the series of reforms undertaken by CBN Governor Sanusi Lamido after a series of banks failed, after a series of private sector abuses that go across not just banking, but in telecoms and oil and gas, you name it. So I want to ask you, if you know that 5 trillion naira in assets, for example, needed to be taken by AMCON because of the mismanagement of the private sector in the Nigerian economy, I want to ask you why it is that Nigerians should believe that the private sector is more altruistic than the public sector when we have seen the kinds of abuses that have been taking place across sectors over a period of time.
That's a very good question. And I will answer it by saying the United States of America has had 3 AMCONs. It hasn't stopped them from being a private-driven sector economy. Almost every country in the world has had situations where the government has come in and given kind of a landing to the banks. UK had it, Spain had it, Italy had it, everybody has it. Once in a while, you're going to have financial crisis, and it's government role to provide an environment where those things are handled carefully. Yes, there were abuses in the past, there will be abuses in the future, but I still think that all of us will agree that the private sector is the best way to create jobs, the best way to create employment, and yes, we should have better regulation and oversight of the private sector. But there's no alternative. Government cannot do it.
And yes, Mr. Chikeobi, my final question to you is, while one acknowledges that the private sector can be a major kind of boost or a major enabling partner in development of countries, there's no doubt about that. I want to ask you, when you talk about effective regulation, because ultimately that's what it comes down to, whether you're talking about the stock market, whether you're talking about the power sector, whether you're talking about the oil and gas sector, telecoms, it goes on, the question comes down to the moral credibility of the leadership of the country to put in place officials that will ensure that these regulatory agencies function well and are not compromised. In your view, is the leadership of former Vice President Atiku Abubakar positioned and ready to put in place regulators who will be independent and incorruptible in such a way that they can effectively manage private sector investment that may come into the country?
The quick answer is yes. And if he doesn't, in 4 years, the Nigerian people should throw him out. And one of the key things about this election is Nigerians have to believe that incompetent or ineffective leaders can be thrown out. And if Atiku